Hi, and welcome to the U World Order Showcase podcast. We have back with us today Michael O'Connor, who's a humanistic astrologer and he offers life coaching. Michael helps people become more clearly and consciously aware of their true nature, authentic destiny, and timing. And he's back to talk about observing the context of the larger planetary cycles in astrology, part two, because we just had to cut off in the middle of a great conversation that we had last
Yeah.
time. So welcome back, Michael.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Lovely to be here. Um, yes, the where we left off there was on the in astrology, as mentioned, the age of Aquarius, based on it being a 2160-year period, which is large already, which is 1/12 of the what that's called a great month, an age or a great month. And then there's what's called a great year, which is 12 times that, about just shy of 26,000 is the whole idea. And so this is a very large cycle, obviously. And the age of Aquarius itself, I've based on quite serious studies and really solid evidence in terms of historical synchronicities, strongly believe that we have yet to arrive at the dawning, no, the actual sunrise. So when we talk about dawn, we are talking pre-sunrise. It's that lovely light, and we've been in it since about 1920, so approximately 100 years already. So, and that makes sense in light of the 2160-year period. So that's the first context, and you don't need to go larger, and there it is. Now, what's so interesting about that is that there's some very wonderful cycles that will culminate right at that time. Most specifically, and it's not the largest of the cycles, but it's an important one. It's called a Jupiter-Saturn cycle. So the Jupiter and Saturn in astrology are the social planets. On no less than winter solstice 2020, and winter solstice in Western astrology is like the grandmother, if you like. It's the real old, it's really the event of winter solstice is synchronistic with the new moon. And if you get into the esoterics of that kind of whole principle, you realize, wow, it's such a powerful event, isn't it? And the answer is, oh yes, it's more than it seems when you kind of get closer to it. So it's the official natural new year. Okay, now, so for a major event of Jupiter and Saturn, which have these 20-year cycles, to have their conjunction right on winter solstice was at no less than exactly 0 degrees of Aquarius. So this was big, and I did a couple of videos, which, people watching this, if you're interested, go to my website, sunstarastrology.com, into the library or into what's called Learn. It's actually on the bar, it's Learn. Then go to the bottom, you see the library, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of videos and articles that have been talking about this for some time. So anybody who's diligent and interested enough, they'll be quite caught up to speed. Now, what's really exciting, and there's two in particular that point right to that event in context to the age of Aquarius. Now, there was more to say, and some of that more has to do with the fact that when two planets conjunct, like Jupiter and Saturn, and they do so every 20 years, there's a very rhythmic cycle for one that I elaborate upon in the article. So I'm not in the video. I'm not going to do that right now. But any two planets that form a new cycle enter into a process of an interrelated dynamic over the time period of the cycle. So the main points are what's called the 90-degree or square points and the 180-degree or opposition points. The squares are like the half moon waxing, and then the opposition points like the full moon, and the other square is the half moon waning. So they're symbolically associated, similar to winter solstice being new moon, spring equinox being the both 6 a.m. and the square, the full moon being summer solstice and the opposition, and that would be 12 noon, and then there's 6 p.m. and the waning square. So you kind of get this 6 p.m. winter solstice and aspect correlation. I just kind of mentioned that because it's kind of interesting and it helps understand, okay, that's what an aspect is. Got it. It's kind of a fractal feature of nature. So the squares and oppositions are when the dynamic event occurs because or the conjunction opposite squares and oppositions because they're symbolic of like the new season. Okay, the quarter of the day, the new season. And so when we come to a square, it gets edgy and it gets dynamic, both leading up to it and following it. Now, it just so happens right at the full moon in Aquarius.
I'm just going to interrupt you for just a second because I've noticed that as you shift into different seasons, you can see it in the weather. The weather has impacts. Like it's really windy in the spring and the fall. I mean, exceptionally windy.
Those are good examples. Yes, there's definitely parallels and correspondences and fractal. When one understands holism and fractal principles, you will see, and this is where we get into the language of synchronicity. So it's not notions of random and arbitrary are kind of almost ridiculous, really. And even notions of the arrow of time, it's like, no, everything in the universe is cycling. So how can you say arrow? It doesn't make any sense. But they do that a bit in science. Kind of, I don't know why exactly, but I suppose they're trying to see further and further back in a linear sense. It's kind of a projection of a linear model of thinking, but everything's cyclic. And so for all intents and purposes, so we won't go into that. But the main thing is here is that just exactly on the very day of the full moon in Aquarius, which was the 19th of August, Jupiter and Saturn formed their first of 3 squares. Why we say 3 is because they too invariably, often, not always, they didn't at the conjunction, but they do sometimes, one or the other will retrograde. Sometimes both, and that retrograde dynamic causes the planet to appear to go backwards. So it's, even though it's apparent and not real, it's our perceptual experience, and that's how astrology works. It's very mystical and interesting how it does that. But the thing is that right on that day, it was the first of 3, and the second occurs in early January, and the third in the June of 2025. So 1, 2, 3. And the last one is very dynamic because while the conjunction was in fixed signs, and this current square is in mutable signs, and the next square will be in mutable signs, the third one of the square dynamic is in cardinal signs. When it's cardinal, cardinals are very dynamic, very active. So all of what this means is it's pointing, especially because the new moon, no, sorry, the conjunction occurred on winter solstice. So it kind of has this now larger collective thing. It's much more powerful than it would be otherwise. And in Aquarius, no less. I mean, my wife was saying, can we fully trust that this is actually happening, or did they kind of make it this way because it's just too damn convenient? And I thought, oh, that's a good point, but that's not one I can answer. But from astrological practice, we would say, no, it proves itself in practice that no, it is accurate. There is a genuineness about where the planets are. And so we can go with that. Admittedly, Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac, which is the one based on the cycle of the sun, where other systems use other things. But that one's very much the more grounded one, connected to the Earth cycle because of the light. So anyway, the point is that this process, and Jupiter and Saturn 20-year cycles. So the fact that the first square has a triple, like 3 squares over the course of approximately 10 months, is not too hard to understand, but they are best understood as a dynamic together. They work, it's all part of a process. So everything's process-based. Well, that's not entirely true. Synchronicity, it does imply various kinds of events. Now, the main point I'm trying to make is that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is all about the economy. And when they happened in Aquarius, in light of the context of the age of Aquarius, you go, ah, what does that mean? And that it sort of, in probable terms, points to the likelihood, the inevitability of a centralized government global economy, which, in the most positive sense, stands to be good. The trouble at worst is that any such revolutionary process implies other things, like, for example, that a global economy and a central bank would not be, strictly speaking, national. This is where the social, economic, political realities of the United States comes to the fore, because it has the strongest dollar. And that's where it worst conflicts with that objective. So it becomes too top dog oriented. So, and then it kind of still begs, well, okay, well, who will run the central bank? Where will it be? And all these questions. And I don't really have all the answers. I'm sure some do, who are watching that economic, and they have a better sense. And some people think, of course, it's Israel, or or it could be Europe, Geneva, Switzerland, etc., whatever, somewhere over there, right, in Europe at least, or somewhere between Europe and Middle East, something like that. But anyway,
the BRICS.
it's true, when you get into that's the whole thing. That's probably a kind of a major thing, because there's contenders for it, right? The BRICS, like you say, and that's where things get very complicated. That is a very valid point, big picture politics, and it's doing what it can. So we could well imagine, and again, I say this humbly because it's not where all my focus is that there's invariably a fair degree of economic warfare always at play, and it's pretty hot these days. And that's probably has more to do with what we see going on than we realize sometimes. Maybe some people know that, strategic positioning, of course, is always there, but it's also, this whole notion of that. So whatever it is specifically, the main point to know is that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is linked to the economy, and it happened at 0 Aquarius. Aquarius is a sign of revolution, and generally speaking, you could say Aquarius is the sign of the collective of humanity. It's like the 11th sign. It's the master number sign, habit 11. And where Pisces, interestingly, in the zodiac is like, it's the sign of the subconscious, or it's literally the sign of the disembodied soul. Okay, so it's very mystical that way, the subconscious disembodied soul. But Aquarius is like the elder, so it all culminates there. And again, in numerology, 11 is a master number, and it gets into all this numerology, astrology, kind of synchronicity, archetypal psychology stuff. But the thing is, what we're talking about is that conjunction of Jupiter-Saturn, which is a sort of generically true. It's not like specific to the United States or Canada or Europe or anywhere else, right? It's just generically true. And the opposition point, which is symbolic of the full moon or summer solstice, 12 noon, is like what we call the culmination point. Well, wouldn't you know it, there'll be another triple square process right in 2029, overlapping into 2030. Just so happens, according to my very detailed calculated studies, that's when the age of Aquarius will have its sunrise moment. And it also is true, and it's not, what those findings are, was not influenced by, and is kind of independent of Agenda 2030.
Hmm.
So like, Agenda 2030, right? So that's not like those findings that I myself have derived from my studies was not based on me trying to make it fit. No. And in fact, I've done quite a big course on it, a master class and a book that I have. I just said to my wife, it's time to finish that book because it gives very specific dates historically going way back that show, I mean, we're talking centuries ago, very right in the year when it would have major events have occurred. So that the timeline proves itself going backwards very, very well, remarkably well, okay, to the year. I didn't go as far as to try and get it to the month and all that, just as long as it was in the year, that was enough, right? And there was major pivotal events. So I feel very, very confident. So lo and behold, my studies of the age of Aquarius and when the sunrise moment will occur coincides exactly with the timeline of Agenda 2030. And it so happens that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which itself occurred at 0 Aquarius, when we say 0 Aquarius, it's like each, like in the zodiac, 0 Aries, the first sign is the Alpha, and the last degree of Pisces is the Omega. But in a fractal sense, the first degree of any sign is the Alpha, and the final degree is the Omega. So that's the fractal principle. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So you kind of break it down. So just like midnight at 11:59, just before midnight is the Omega, and the 12 midnight is the Alpha of the day, right? So this 12 midnight or Alpha point was activated in the sign of Aquarius on winter solstice in 2020, right as COVID was getting all hot and bothered and all of that. So you kind of think that's where some people are very suspicious that the various powers that be use astrology. And I can well imagine
Yeah,
they
no
do.
doubt.
Yeah, oh yeah, they do. And it does generally suggest that it's interesting because my studies, especially with the Age of Aquarius, were not based on anything I read. I just was sort of interested in it for a long time. And I began to think, I'd read a book when I was literally 40 years ago that talked all about it. And I kind of put a seed in my head and I was very curious and I thought about it for many years. And I finally sat down and looked at the history, and it's not a small task. I was like, well, there you go. And again, I won't try and elaborate on it. There's a lot of details, but all of these things are sort of rather strong synchronistic indicators that we are in the probably, not that I specifically condone it, by the probability in a predictive sense, we are going to, like it or not, create a digital economy with a central bank. I know I like cash. I like the way it is, but it just, there it is as a, what I would call a high probability that it's, and the
You can look at the
centralized,
evolution of banking as it's gone on. I can remember when you could have a bank. I had like First Interstate Bank, I think was the bank I had maybe 40 years ago.
yeah,
And they had branches in different states, and I'd moved from California to Washington, and I couldn't deposit my paycheck in the bank in Washington. I had
right,
to deposit it in the bank in California. I, I was blown away at that
yeah.
time because I was trying to cover a mortgage payment in California. But it was like, now, it doesn't matter which state you're in, you
Like
can.
you say, that is definitely the high side of it. And there are starving people in the world, and there's poor economies. And I personally am all for if it like a global economy centralized bank, if we can trust who's watching the watchers is the question, the perennial question. But other than that, yeah, I think it positively speaking, global education, global medical, right? Just don't make us do things and
The difference between having uh an anarchy type arrangement where we can all come together and more
yeah.
like a family rather than a dictatorship where there's going to be controls put over everyone being able to interact. Because the problem with digital anything is that somebody can always flip the switch and then you're disconnected from everything.
For example, like they're showing in China, it's high
Mhm.
level surveillance. And my general thought is that's very likely to be true early on.
Mhm.
So it will itself have to evolve. And as you astutely mentioned, that we'll have to get past the other contenders on the game board, like BRICS, for example,
Mhm.
who aren't so kind of interested in our kind of hippie dreams of a global economy. But on the very high side, it very much aligns with the Aquarian principle. And it does sort of point to some form of probably global socialism, because if you do provide free education and medical, basically those two even, you're now in a socialist system. And then there's, of course, in anybody who studies economic or political science knows there's a spectrum of range. Like Canada is that much more socialist than the United States, and then Sweden's more socialist than Canada, and so on. And China, of course, is the most socialist slash communist. And it all generally sounds good, but it as much as it's restrictive, and especially, and there's a saying that communism, which is extreme socialism, is atheistic. And that, so in other words, it's the ongoing revolutions of evolution will be here, right? To iron out a lot of creases invariably. But the thing we're after is the where I'm not making hard predictions, I'm presenting probabilities that we are now at the turning point. It's a process in this. You see a square, you said it gets windier, and it's the beginning of the new season. It's 6 a.m. kind of thing. So, and spring equinox. So, yes, everything starts to move faster. So, we will see over this, well, starting kind of like with the election in the United States. This is where it's between
It's
now,
already
especially.
started.
Exactly. It's between now and
Mhm.
June 2025 when the square dynamic unfolds. So we can expect, it's kind of it's almost like helping people see it so they're not caught into confusion and fear and reaction. So that's my main interest, aside from, it's true, my conviction that we live in a conscious, intelligent universe, and that synchronicity is a real thing. In other words, it's all on purpose, which is kind of nice to hear, right? It's a
Comforting.
There's a rhyme and reason, time and season to it all. There is a grand plan, and that grand plan is kind of subject to the fact that we don't just have consciousness, but we live in consciousness. And that's the spiritual, esoteric, holistic principle of the ages, the perennial philosophy. But okay, but this ground back to earth and reality, and just the fact of our mortality, we have to get through all this, right? That the economy will undergo some very, like, politically, socially, there'll be some very assertive measures over this period, and maybe even more so, especially after the final of the squares, which is in the early summer, very, very early, technically summer, June 2025. And then it will really push. It'll go into, see, the square is symbolic of decisive action. It's very yang, very verb. Okay, so we've been in a kind of more about, yes, yin yang conversations there, but in this context, that will be the most yang moment. Okay, so when not that I'm not attached, I don't have a attachment and so forth, but when I say the United States, which has the American dollar, which is the strongest dollar, is in the way, I think. Now, I say that, I think it's what they, if you want, right, are thinking. And that's where, one can go to all kinds of lengths and efforts to try and interpret what's going on. And the citizen journalists are kind of losing their mind practically because so many people seem either oblivious or invested in it. And they can't quite understand. It's like, oh my God, like what about good old America, and mom and apple pie? Let's get back to being us. And it's like, so
Never is the same.
no, exactly. It gets a bit philosophical, but not everybody thinks that way, of course. Now, here's where it comes down to even closer to ground zero in light of the United States. So when not all astrologers work the same, and I'm a very contextual thinker. I like to see the bigger cycles within which the smaller dynamics are occurring. Now I understand. So not everybody does that as much, I think. They just go, okay, it's gonna be kind of a shitty March, and here we go, or October, and good luck, But this be the, good astrology can say it's gonna be
Watch out
lasting
for the
this
following
long.
comments.
It'll last this long, it'll affect these areas of your life, and oh my God, fasten your seatbelt, or this is what you can do. That would be helpful. Okay, but to see that in a larger context to me is helpful, even though it's a bit more effort for the person to have to, okay, I see the bigger picture. The thing is, in the United States now, 3 major, very major, and a 4th one is coming. Like, these are not small things. 4, and even that well, as a matter of fact, that even itself is semi the short list, but it goes like this. Now, it is true that one of the ones I mentioned last time was, the first of them was a Saturn return cycle. So every 29.5 years, Saturn comes back and it establishes a certain kind of dynamic. And when it happened last time in the United States was way back in 2011. Okay, that's a long time, all 13 years, right? But it hasn't reached its midpoint yet. The midpoint of that cycle is very significant, and it's about to, in approximately a year to, like, I haven't closely analyzed it, but it's approximately about 16 months from now. Okay, it'll come to what we call, as a matter of fact, one second. I'm going to just look at that as I do have it. I want to know what that is better. Okay, first. Oh no, that's not true. I don't have it. Hang on. Okay. Okay, no, I don't have it. Okay, Saturn return. Okay. Okay, you know what? It's too much geeky calculating. I'm not going to do it on the computer, so I don't want to waste our time. But yeah, it's very close. And even though, okay,
So we're looking at like maybe December of 2025.
the end of 2025, approximately. Yes, that's exactly right. And 2025 is going to be pretty epic already. Now, what's really significant about that chart, when I look at the Saturn return chart for the United States, I was like, holy smokes. There was 4-planet, what we call stellium in, I'm going to show it to you, okay? Oh no, I can't. You have the calm. So I can't. Okay. There's a 4-planet stellium in Aries. Aries in astrology. Whenever you see Aries, it's the sign of new beginnings. So
You can
remember
share it.
Oh, can I? Oh, like you can't see it. Or do I have, no,
Yeah,
hang on. I
you can
must
just
be
share
missing
this,
something.
share your screen, and then
Oh, I can. Okay, okay, yes, okay. I'm not used to the when, okay. No, okay, got it. Got it. Okay.
this is mainly a podcast, but I'll put it up on YouTube. So if you're
Sure.
listening to this on the podcast side, go over to YouTube to @Heart Life Coach and look for this over there in the actual videos of the podcast episodes.
I'm having a little trouble bringing it up. Now, okay, there it is. Can you see that?
Mhm.
Okay. There's this little debate in the United States between what time exactly on July 4th, 1776 did the United States begin. And we're not going to get lost in that. Saturn is a very, very slow moving planet. Some believe it was like 2 a.m. in the morning. Others think it was about 5 in the afternoon. I'm one of those who goes with the 5 in the afternoon. Most astrologers do, but there's a surprising group of people who think it was otherwise. And it kind of paints a kind of a rosier picture of the United States, I must admit, the other one. So, and I don't want to argue, I can't be sure. But what's most important is Saturn didn't move a pinch in that day because it's too slow a planet. So what we're looking at is what's called the Saturn return chart of the US Sibley chart. Okay, that's what people who might have any sense, they can look it up. It's got a very, very interesting chart for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, there's the 4 planets in Aries and no less than what's called a Uranus-Sun conjunction. That is very significant. So what that means is that generally speaking, since 2011, like and I haven't done close studies, but various significant synchronistic new turns came about that would have since then been unfolding. Okay. And it's a very, the Sun Aries conjunction is very new, very radical almost. And of course, Obama, okay, in 20, well, he was in 2008, right? And then he had a second round in 2012. So he was right in the context of it. There was that. Then, of course, there was the Trump after that, and it was in the context of it as well. And even so when you understand it in that 30-year cycle, you see all of these very, very significant major events. Okay, can we say Black African president? Okay, that's new, right? Radical, revolutionary, big turn. Now, if Kamala Harris kind of wins, for example, that would be, she says she's Indian, I don't know, by the way, I don't want to get into that, but Black American, African American, Indian American, I don't
She's
know, but
Jamaican, but I could be wrong.
okay, okay, because there was one that said, "Are you Indian?" She said, she said yes. Oh, okay, I don't really know, but what we're talking about is that if one sees the bigger picture, they say, and some who have done closer studies will recognize that yes, that can be seen as a very significant beginning, and we're still not even halfway through it. So that should lend a hint that the United States is undergoing a very major, revolutionary, radical new beginning that will complete itself only in 2040. By the way, it'll take until 2040 for it to finally come to its full. So that's obviously a long period of time. So you can see why, even though we're referring to 13 years ago, we're still hot in this context of this chart. Okay. Now, what's also quite significant, there's a lot of significance in this chart. We won't go on and on, but it's that Sun-Uranus conjunction is the real one. Okay. And you can go on and on to analyze what the meaning of this chart is and implications. We can talk for hours. But that one's the first major one. the fact that the north nodes in Sagittarius conjunct the galactic center is something some will notice, which is very significant, which is kind of like saying the United States has sort of what could be called a spiritual destiny to play, which I quite like that on the positive side. On the positive side, it does appear to have, you see, Neptune is at 29 degrees, so where the Sun and Uranus are at the early degrees, right on spring equinox, by the way. Just OPS, it was in 2011, right on spring equinox, like the day after. Okay, so that's real. And then Neptune, because it's at 29 degrees, that's called a critical degree because there's only 30 degrees in a sign. So all of this shows, and also Pluto at the fourth house cusp. If Pluto is in your fourth house, by transit or like progression, or in your what's called an important return chart, solar or Saturn, right? It's it's nothing short of like gutting the house. Like, it's like a complete renovation of the house. Okay, this house has nice bones, but we're going to rip it right down to them, right down to the cement, right down to the hardwood and the bones and nothing else. And then we're going to re-insulate it. We're going to do everything, right? Like, just going to hold on to what can be, but the roof is gone, everything.
All you
So
got's the frame.
the whole thing, but the frame and the cement and the foundation, and even that could undergo. So in a symbolic sense, you go, holy smokes, what are we talking about here? And look what's happening. Yeah, so we're talking about synchronicity again. There's a horizontal consciousness is dominoes, linear logic. This happens, that happens, the other thing happens. But vertical logic is, no, it's not that simple. There's a synchronicity at play. And it's a leap of awareness and consciousness to appreciate that. But there you go. By the way, the moon's in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio is one of the most difficult places for the moon to be. It talks about emotional, I refer to it as the emotional roller coaster. And it's now on the high side. Fortunately, the moon is in harmonious aspect to Mars. That doesn't hurt. Thank goodness, quite frankly. Thank goodness. That's a bit of a saving grace. And the 29-degree Neptune-Venus conjunction is also quite good, well aspected. And interestingly enough, to the north node. No, okay, that's very significant because the north node is like a magnet pole. So the United States, basically speaking, is undergoing in this 30-year process a rebirth, like a house, like it's being reinvented. I say this that with great confidence, and it's fairly obvious that, oh yeah, of course by 2040, but no, not just of course. No, it's going to be reinvented. Okay, this is more than it seems. There's no ifs, buts, maybes, and there's nobody who's going to do something to make it turn back. I'm going to strongly encourage that will not happen. Definitely not. And interestingly enough, it occurred at a time when, from the standpoint of the United States, Jupiter was opposing Saturn. So it kind of, quite frankly, includes a type of humbling. Okay. Now, America is known for being proud, and for good reason, all kinds of good reasons. And it's not a judgment on any person or any state or anything, not the United States, nothing. This is not like, although this is the chart of the United States, astrology is not biased to that. It's just, it is what it is. The day that the United States was brought into reality, birthed by the signature of the founding fathers, as the story goes, right? On July 4th. We declare that, we the people, thing, right? Declare that we will create a nation. Well, on that moment, that on the basis of exactly that day, this chart is based. So you cannot, it's not like fudging or nothing, games, no parlor tricks, nothing. Okay. So, wow is basically the simplest, best word. And again, the sun Uranus conjunct. See, in astrology, the planets are the real thing. And when a planet is in Aries, it's already significant, especially at the very early degrees. That's very significant, or any planet, because you have 4. But when a planet is conjunct another planet, and especially one like Uranus, it's like, ooh, it's like what you could call Uranus conjunct the sun is not simply like a lot of TNT, metaphorically speaking, it's nuclear. Like this is, now I'm not, please, nobody think that I just said it's gonna be a nuclear war, there's gonna be a nuclear bomb. I'm not saying that.
No.
I'm saying metaphorically, it is so significantly transformational that it almost won't be recognized really. Like it won't be the same. And that's all I'm going to say for now. Okay. It's going to be a different country in a manner of speaking. And I by no means wish anybody harm or, nothing like,
It's the way nations go. If you look back
yeah.
100 years, this country was totally different than it is now. And if you look back 200 years, it was totally different than it was 100 years later. Things happen along the line, and not all of the things that happen are public knowledge or train. Our children are trained to understand what's going on because we perceive things to be a way that they are because of the information we've been given or we've gathered. And not all of the information that you get is accurate or true. But the things that really are accurate or true do determine what's going to come later in the process. So no matter what you're saying, this is just like, this isn't saying you're not forecasting gloom and doom for the United States. It's just that this is a picture of what the planets are indicating could possibly come about. And these are a few of the pieces that are on the board that could dictate certain patterns of action. And we're not even saying that any of this is a foregone conclusion.
Well, actually, everything you said is very accurate, Jill. Like change happens. And yes, the United States is not what it was from, all the way through. There's been very significant turning points, and one could go back and study the Saturn return charts over the many centuries, since its inception. It's true, and if they did, there were historians, they would see. So what it is, it's not there's no maybes here, though. I will offer that, but yes, it's well taken that um life is always full of change. That's the law. And it's hardly what it was in, even in the 60s, and
Mhm.
even in later than that. Right. So the interesting
Yeah.
thing is approximately about 1982 was the one before that. About 1953 was the one before that. So you can go on like that. 1920.
Those make such total sense to me because I was around during those periods and I can see major shifts from 1982 to today. Life is totally different.
Exactly. It
It
goes
is
like that.
totally
There's a
different.
technological, there's the global thing, there's this and that all going. But now the thing is that this chart, I haven't looked at the others, and I could, and maybe perhaps we'll do a video on it. But more specifically, this one is like, it's just the metaphor of the house stripped down to its foundation and its bones and rebuilt is a good way to describe it. Now, the thing is that this is the tricky part. The rebuilding doesn't strictly necessarily mean it will happen entirely during this period. This period is kind of like more fully the stripping down. Okay, so now, and it does, it's like so it just simply seems like the United States by its destiny, and it was all just very, in the natural organic flow of the signatures, and I'm sure they weren't thinking this way then, right? They weren't planning ahead. They didn't even know about Uranus and Neptune and Pluto way back then. So they wouldn't have known, okay, that Uranus would have been conjunct the sun and Pluto would have been at the fourth house cusp, which is that powerful indication of nothing, just stripping. And then Neptune at the highest degree, no less. Wow. So, but maybe on the very positive sense, it's like looking at a beautiful old house, but it's, the wood is eaten away. It's kind of no longer holds its integrity, but we're going to use the land, we're going to use the ground, we're going to create something new and beautiful, right? So that's the hope and promise of progress and positivity. It's not just hopium, but it's just the natural inclination of people to want to rebuild if something, etc. Okay, so there's that. So the Saturn return chart within is the first very significant contextual perspective for the United States that I'm looking at that's started further back than the others. Now, the fact that in 2022 now that there was what's called a Pluto return. Okay, can you see this different chart? Now, if you go up to the left corner here, you're going to say Pluto return, US Sibley chart, July 11th, 2022. Okay, and it's done for Washington, etc. Could have done Philadelphia. It doesn't really matter, but it makes sense. Washington, D.C., right? That's what we call where do we locate it? We go, well, where's the government, kind of thing. And in the federal sense. Now, this chart, it tells something else, but what you're mostly interested with this chart is just simply that Pluto has a 246-year cycle. So it's been ever since the birth of the United States, and this is the first Pluto return, and it just happened in 2022 in context to the Saturn return cycle, which is so dynamic with the Aries and the Pluto energy. Okay, the renovation principle. So we look at this, and we won't go on and on about this, but interestingly enough, it very beautifully has Uranus conjunct the North Node in Taurus. So what that means is that it will rebuild itself. But now the Pluto return itself had a triple return. So the way I work with it, you have to take that 240-year period and divide it by 3, which is almost exactly 80 years. So it's a big story here that it will take 80 years, like within the context, not entirely, but it will take within the context of 80 years to so we're talking about long, slow processes. Okay, so we're not talking some overnight, or even though the Jupiter-Saturn one is very current and big, but it's more generic, so it's not like it's about the United States specifically, but it's, as I said, the United States has the strongest dollar, but it's in light of this global economic notion, in light of the age of Aquarius, it might be in the way of that. That's okay. That's the whole supposition. So it's, again, nothing against good old neighbor cousin America for me, right? At all, in fact. But this kind of thinking, the beauty of it is it makes you free. I think it can help person get out of instinctual survival reaction fear into intuitive, embrace the flow, accept there's a larger rhyme and reason, time and season, destiny to it all, and then just love life, embrace life,
Enjoy
maybe
the moment. Live in the
step
moment
out
and
of
don't worry about things generally don't happen super fast. And
Yeah,
even if something does happen super fast, it's like throwing a rock in the ocean. Yeah, there's going to be some big waves really fast,
yeah.
but then it's going to calm down and it's going to ripple out and then it's just going to blend in and then it's a new normal. The water's just a little higher.
Sure, there you go. There you go. Those are good metaphors, exactly. But it can also maybe perhaps help some people. There's a lot of wide-eyed run for the hills going on out there, and yeah, fill up the basement with food, which I don't think is the wrong thing to do. But then the guns, and then the vigilantes, and then the survivalists, and it's like maybe, and this is not for everybody. This kind of thinking, I appreciate, and I don't expect people to think this way strictly, but it could be helpful to get them into a kind of uh, an acceptance, a surrender, a gratitude. Just be here. Make me, rather than going to survival. How about turn your attention to what might constitute meaningful contributions, which, by the way, is what authenticity is truly about. If you get into, like, when I do astrology, like you said, is true. I'm really interested in helping people identify and align with consciously with their choices, with their authentic destiny in a more conscious way. Many people do it, but not consciously. So all I do is help them be conscious of what they're already doing. So but some people aren't, they're off track. But if one does it authentically, almost invariably authentic in its most pure sense implies meaningful contribution. You're somehow going, okay, how can I help? Right. And that's because
And it
it's our
doesn't always
nature.
have to be with physical things. You can learn skills and be able to share them with others. Foraging is, for example, or some old crafts like how to make soap, how to make cheese, how to milk animals, how to garden. Gardening is just throw some seeds out there and they'll just like sprout up. It
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, it goes on and on what you can do. And it's true. When you look at people's personal astrology charts, you realize, it's very wide spectrum. The notion of conformity, or the notion of kind of this is the way, it's like, no, no, no. That has nothing to do with authenticity at all. That's why communism couldn't work. You can't just tell people they'd rather die. They will die. You
they will
you
die.
you will kill them. If you make them be what they're not, they will die. So a free world, a free society within various degrees of, like, even a healthy measure of socialism doesn't mean you're not allowed to do things. You still have a lot of freedom, right? And so on and so forth. But if it comes to a point where, people are being controlled, well, you might as well have a death camp because it will kill them.
If you have socialism in the way where people are contributing because they want to contribute, rather than socialism where you're assigned jobs and you have
Exactly.
to do that, you have to contribute in a certain way. That's where people, just by virtue of the fact that they're human beings, start to bristle. when
Oh
you
yeah.
when you can offer your services to the next person in exchange for their gifts and how they can contribute, it makes for a more meaningful relationship among individuals, but also among a community. And honestly, that's the world I envision
Well,
is a
there
world
you
where
go.
we're all valued for our individual contributions and you just contribute because that's who you are. You're allowed to just be who you are. And when
And
we're
to contribute, exactly, and to contribute, therefore, by that very statement, your way.
Yeah.
All
Mhm.
exactly right. So when we say socialism, anybody listening, just be clear. If you understand anything well with like political science, you understand everything's got a spectrum. So if you have a modicum of socialism, then you could have like free medical, like, tax paid medical and, for example, education even. But it doesn't mean that you're being dictated to or endlessly told what to do, because that will never work. And that will just be, it will never work. It just cannot work. So don't be afraid that that's ever going to happen. If it did happen, it won't last. It just cannot. That is where the tide, everybody will turn, it just won't work. It just trust that. Just like in the
And
United
even
States.
even without a government, you can have subsidized care for certain things. People can be subsidized in a way that helps them to prosper, and everybody prospers together. And
Together,
it
what's
elevates the
really
whole society.
what's really beautiful about that statement is that there's reason to believe that the United States, this chart here, the Pluto return chart, is not a common one for astrologers to look at. So we're in a sort of but like new territory, because how often do you study a Pluto return? It's kind of very, very rare. Only a country could have that. Okay, only a country. So you have to be in what's called mundane astrology, which I touch on, which we're doing right now, the astrology of nations. Now, the thing to understand is that the way to interpret the return chart is just like interpreting a natal chart. You just have to, like, there's different strategies to it. It's true, and one can go on and on with different techniques, but basically, it's the basic rule of thumb. You just look at a return chart like a natal chart, and what does it say? And what it said, we won't go on and on about this chart neither, because again, you can talk for hours and hours about any chart. But it's this Uranus-Taurus conjunction, which is rebuilding. But also, it's interesting that the Sun-Mercury conjunction, they're a bit wide, but they're together in the sign of Cancer, which is the sign of the sun in the United States chart. Like Canada, July 1st, United States, July 4th, we both have sun sign Cancer, home, family, roots, all that mom and apple pie kind of principle. Now, but it wasn't necessarily that the sun would be in Cancer, but it happened to be that the Pluto return happened in July, 1 week after July 4th. So the sun was still in the sign of Cancer in Western astrology. So now what's interesting, it's all about it's in the house of relationships. What's also interesting on the house cusp of Cancer, so this is a sign of Cancer on the house cusp of Cancer, which is right down here, the 4th house cusp. It's Aries again, new, okay, like it's Aries is the sign of new beginnings. It's the baby of the zodiac, pioneering initiatives, bold new, enter the unknown, all the thing, right? Okay, and interestingly also, Jupiter and Chiron are fairly close, especially Chiron. Chiron here is very significant, and it's in square to the sun. What that means is it's kind of like it's going to have to almost like reinvent itself once again. That term I use, it's going to be like, who are we now and what do we do now? But what it looks like positively will occur, but this is the positive. People will be pushed to work together, I think. So what's indirectly emerging here is that the levels of prosperity that exist may not be like it was, as we already see that, right? And there may be more, this is being shown by the moon in Sagittarius, or the Sagittarius rising sign. There's a lot to say about this once again, but in the most basic positive sense, it's going to invite, I've got to check something here. One moment. Just going to check. Okay. 1 second. I'm just going to check what it's saying. Okay. Yeah, it could be, a tad like tumultuous, like meaning like in the rebirthing and the regrowing and the rebuilding. It could create factions. Okay, so that's kind of the scary part of this. But people like will maybe pushed to stand and work together to offset this faction kind of thing. So I'm just saying that as I see it now, okay, and not sure exactly what to say about that, but I do see this basically There is one last thing I'll mention, and again, we can go on, and perhaps we could another time, but it's just, most people aren't sure what they're even looking at. What you're looking at is, of course, planets on an astrology chart. So I'm going to get out of here in a second. But what I did notice in particular is Mars and Jupiter in this chart are technically what we call unaspected planets. What that means is they're wild card planets. That basically it shows that it's going to be like a rebirthing on many levels. And yes, people will have to work together, but it will create kind of like the foundations of a new spirituality, like a new ethic. So positively, it'll kind of serve to dismantle segregations. Like, it could have people will always believe what they believe, right? But maybe with less dominance, like, like any given religion won't dominate. It'll be more wide open, more liberal, more, live and let live, and stop trying to convince everybody of what you believe, kind of thinking. And that, okay, so then that kind of thing. I'm going to
You
leave
can
this
already see
there.
this happening.
Oh yeah, okay. You would. I'm not surprised. You're out there. You've got your finger on the pulse. I'm sure quite well. Clearly by what you're commenting, it's there. Yeah. So okay. So Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the age of Aquarius, new global economy thing. United States kind of on its not consequentially sync it itself above and beyond what's going on. Like, okay, it's a bit confusing. The Aquarius age, the Saturn Jupiter conjunction, that's generic for the planet. But even if you took those things away, okay, the United States is going through these changes anyway. But the age of Aquarius and the whole other Saturn Jupiter Aquarian economy theme is contextually involved in a kind of a, just like that word says, context way. So it's like, from the standpoint of the United States being a nation in the world, it's under, because the age of Aquarius and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, et cetera, are global perspectives. So this is a national one, but this would be happening anyway. When we have wild card planets unaspected, it means, well, I'm going to go with what I said, but it could well produce kind of various forms of people, old factions disintegrating and new ones being born, like new alliances, okay, so it's quite significant. I won't try and paint it too much, and so forth. The other couple of charts I'm going to mention more briefly. Okay, but they are significant still. Because I know we're getting on here. We don't want to go too much longer here. But the one in particular that I wanted to mention beyond the Pluto is mostly, I was doing a few of these. Yeah, there's a Jupiter. Okay, no, not that one. It's, yeah, yeah, there is Jupiter. Jupiter returns every 12 years. There's so it just so happens, and in July 2025, so right after that Jupiter Saturn square there, there's going to be a Jupiter conjunction, return, and positively speaking, it speaks of like a new confidence, but it is tumultuous still. It's like there's no going back. There's no returning to the good old days. There's no going back to various thises and that's. And it's nice to be nostalgic and think we could if we would, and we would if we could, right? To, some people say, oh God, can we, even the 90s back, please. You know, some of the younger people wouldn't know what that means, but those of us who are a little older know it was not that perfect, but it was kind of a not so crazy, right? So now there's
It had its own
but this
crazy,
is,
but we just weren't aware of it as much as we're aware of stuff that's
well,
happening
you know
now.
what? That's true. That's true. But it's even so, I think there's more revving up going on now, and especially in the US chart. So yes, the Jupiter return chart does start next year, and it's a 12-year cycle. It's really important to understand that phrase, that this chart will hold for 12 years. Okay, like it plays a background role, it's true. But you know, you kind of, what does it say? It's very creative at best, but there's a sense of rediscovering ourselves, like who are we now? And I know, you know, it's a sense of needing to go forward, but like a sense of well,
Inter-
basically speaking, it's not as easy.
It's interesting that it's gonna go through its cycle, and it'll cycle one more time just before the Jupiter, is it Jupiter-Uranus
Right
connection?
after the Jupiter-Saturn square, right
Yeah,
closely on its heels is what you're saying there, I believe. And yes,
and also
then
close to the dawning
oh,
of
yeah, well, yes, as a
of
matter
the
of fact,
age of
yes.
Aquarius.
So yeah, I understand. Okay, yes, right. That 2029, it will overlap in that. Yeah, I think that it won't be like as he just as we're seeing now in a global level, there's a recession, right? And I think I'm a little bit concerned at worst that it's going to be big in the States, and perhaps it already is.
Mhm.
So it's kind of delicate conversation there. And I don't pretend to know all the details, but it could be harder to earn a dollar and all of that. And but positively that people will learn that we got to work together more than we used to. So the kind of scale of individuality, you know, like, you know, everybody being sort of isolated or whatever you want to call it. That's not uncommon all over the world, but the United States looks like will be pushed a bit more to new alliances, those factions could be the good, bad, and the ugly too. You know, you can understand what I'm indirectly hinting at.
Mhm.
If things get tougher, you know, it brings out the instinct-driven, gnarly, rationalized action that is. So I'm, you know, so it's kind of, it's pretty serious that way. Now, this is the one more I'll look at, what's is called the Uranus return. The reason I'm looking at it is because it's an 84-year cycle and it happens in 2027. So you see, that's a lot of major planetary return activity here, right? Let me just check one more thing very briefly. 1 second. I just want to go back and remind myself of one more thing. Okay, yeah. No, the Neptune return won't happen for a long time. So it was like something like 80 or something years. So we won't even worry about we're talking about all the far planets. So the fact that Uranus, the one will kind of end on here as a return, even though it's in 2027, it's very close in context, July 26th, so a few years from now. And it similarly is showing a very um, it's kind of erratic is what comes to mind as one of the words. Um, you know, it purely by the destiny of the United States. It's not about them or they or who done it or anything. It's exceedingly everything we're looking at is based on that some revolutionary people based on, of course, a larger dynamic of history got together and decided we're going to become a nation. And they signed that Declaration of Independence on a certain day. And all this is based on that. So you can't go into them and they and we're victimized. No, it's not like that. If you understand
Yeah.
the themes of destiny, it's not for everybody to fully understand or even believe what the astrology is saying, but I'm going to, with confidence, say that the United States is going to is already and will continue to undergo such a significant change. You see, I must admit, when you say that it's changed, over the years, it has, right? But it's going to go to another level. I don't think that will just be, negative. I think it will be very positive. But I suppose one could look at the whole country and say, what needs to happen? It's some I've heard it before, like what's called the rebirthing of America.
Mhm.
Okay, and some people will say we need this. Okay, and maybe not everybody does, not everybody's interested, not everybody thinks that way, but it's what's going to happen. And maybe in the grand scheme of things, it makes me wonder, and I generally suspect it won't be. Some people won't like this, but I don't. I question whether it will be a superpower. Because no country, if the globalization of high technology and the evolution on the global scale are to occur, it kind of can't be that way. So because it's
Not
the big
necessarily a bad thing. So
no,
most of the
because
reason we're a superpower is because we kill a lot of people.
that's the point exactly.
Just the
Because it's
definition
the
of it.
big player on the game board, because it's like the warrior on the field that nobody wants to tackle, because it's and most American people I've met are nice people, they're kind, they're friendly, they're
Ex-
good-hearted, so it's
But as
not
a country, it's the bully on the block.
it happens to be, and then many Americans don't want that. They're like so, but unfortunately, a lot of the money probably is generated from and this is that military engagement, I suppose, right? I don't really know. I'm not an economist. I don't really pretend to understand how all that money is generated, right?
It's
Except
stolen
for
off the backs of the American people, is how
sure,
it's
there's good
generated.
old-fashioned hard work and there's good old-fashioned consumerism, of
They're
course.
they're they're taxed. It's and
Tech,
and
yeah,
we're taxed in inflation, which is created because these big conglomerates are sucking so much money out of our economies in the form of the government, and the government redistributes it to we have we have corporate socialism in this country more than, and that has to go. I'm sorry, but it just can't continue on because there aren't enough people to continue to support these socialistic empires that are out there, the medical empire, the military industrial complex. These complexes are all supported by government money, and the government gets it through taxation, but they also get it through borrowing. And the borrowing is what's really crushing the people.
gotcha. Yes. So thank you for that. That was a wonderful, simple, very erudite way of saying it. Yes, according to the astrology, the United States is now already fully on track to undergoing a rebirth, a reinvention, a rebuilding, but it's not a quick process we're talking about, well, probably at least in the arena of Reno process, okay, of at least 50 years, and more to the tune probably of 80. But 50 is a kind of somewhat conservative perspective. But remember, in order, like in that process includes first, I think it has to first go through its, if you do a reno, you first have to strip it down. So that's where things get kind of uncomfortable, and it begs the question, but the stripping down right now, and remember, there's the horizontal linear logic. This happens, that happens, they're doing this, and that's not untrue. But then there's the vertical, which is what we're looking at, the synchronistic. So that, see, when you get into the synchronistic perspective, you realize that everything happening in the horizontal perspective, linear logic, push-pull physics, is connected to what would be, in the broader sense of the term, called, on one level, the laws of nature, and on the other, the plan. Okay, like it's that when you study astrology well, you understand that the archetypal principles, it's kind of in historical, Greece and so Rome, the gods, but the gods aren't these arbitrary players. They're archetypal principles associated with very large evolutionary cycles that, it's kind of like saying nothing personal, just like, for example, it's in a ironic, statement, quite frankly, to make right now, like to Ukraine, I'm like, look, you lovely Ukrainian people, it's not really about you, but it just so happens that's what. And people will say, well, that's happening because of this, and that's happening because of that. And I'll go, okay, yeah, okay, I understand. But if we were to study that country, we see their astrology, but the vertical thing is that it kind of arrived at this juncture. The same could be true of course, Palestine. Right. And so you see, in other words, what I mean is it's not biased. And it's just a question of when, not if, that it's, the next place, the next place, the next place is going to undergo its processes of rising and falling, and
It's the same with human beings. We all have a destiny in our lives, and we're going to go through the process. And if you're older when you look at your birth chart, like I was, you
yeah.
can realize, you can recognize, oh, I remember when I went through that period and what was happening there and this period. And if you get a birth chart when you're younger, you can look at it and say, oh, okay, so these kinds of things are going to appear during my lifetime, and I can take advantage of the good things, and I can shore up my resources for the things that aren't going to be so pleasant that I will go through. And it's not like, it's not to put people in fear of what's coming. It's to help you prepare
It's the
mentally,
opposite. Exactly. It's the opposite.
and to embrace it, because change always comes with the yin and the yang of it. There's going to be things that you're going to be like, oh, this is so amazing, and there's going to be things like, oh God, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. And the things that you don't want to deal with anymore, they're not forever. When I was truck driving, when I first got into truck driving, I was definitely afraid of going through winters as a truck driver, because I never drove in snow before. And and what I learned is that it only snows for a little while.
Yeah.
If you're going to travel through it, or you're going to stop and it's going to pass over you. It's not a forever thing. It doesn't snow for 3 months straight. Okay? It just doesn't
For example,
in
yes,
any
these
given
are
spot.
exactly. It's there's, it kind of comes full circle to timeless wisdom, like be grateful, try and be authentic, make meaningful contributions, live, like be here now. right?
Mhm.
Help your neighbor. All the good classical ethical principles of humanism, etc., has always been true. It's remain ever, but the revolutions of evolution will happen whether we like it, believe it, or not. And getting into blame and so forth, or even hyper reaction is kind of what will occur. But so it was on the highest side, I guess, with all of this insight here shared, yeah, those kinds of messages. Of course, just to lend one final statement, that's what my work is about, is helping people navigate whatever is happening. And I can see their destiny plan and therefore help them understand the cycles of destiny. It all together comes back to the whole paradigm of astrology is that life is not merely purely circumstantial, it's synchronistic and destined. There's a rhyme and reason, time and season to our lives and to life in general, and we could call it historically, spiritually, religiously, the plan, which is very relevant to say. And all notions that it's not there is you're not aware that you've lost touch. You think it's all just random and arbitrary and chaotic, and no, but it can seem like that. But it's not. Anyway, so there you go. That's some insights and uh pretty good, quick, in light of how much we encompassed, admittedly, even though we've been here for an hour and a half. But still, it's not a quick conversation after all to talk about these things. But yeah, there was one more thing, and I don't mean to belabor this, but I just was kind of curious about the birthday chart of the United States this year. Like, well, okay, this is all big and coming, and okay, well, what's going on this year, kind of thing. And this is what's called the solar return chart for the United States this year. And I must admit, it's a similar theme, to what we've been talking about. It's a major, um, the economy already probably, like people are having to work harder, go harder, be more strategic at best. But it's also that some people are probably realizing, I just can't win that game. And so the sun and moon are in the transformational house of Scorpio. And so when you look at this chart, I ask myself, okay, well, what's this mean? It means that there will be some degree of rebuilding already. It's almost as though it's probably best to understand that, like if you're renovating a house, probably a better metaphor, now that I'm looking at this, I moved to say this. It's that we're not okay, we're going to strip it, we're going to go the whole thing, but we're going to do it in sections. Okay, we're going to start here and strip it down and rebuild this, and it's going to, by the time we're done, we'll go A to Z, and even on the outside, inside and out. Okay, but we'll do it in sections. So I was conveying that it looked at first that, oh my gosh, it's going to strip down. But as I look at this, it seems to tell me something slightly different, and the rebuilding will already be there. So that's a nice way of looking at it. I'm glad I looked at this for that reason. Um, but it is asking that people realize that don't blame and don't react and don't project and what's called displace. Displace means we're gonna hurt the others because this is happening to me, right? People do that, displacing. But it's kind of saying, okay, we're gonna have to really work with this process more deliberately. It still kind of does beg the question what that exactly means. But wow, that waning moon. So it's especially with the election coming in the United States, what is that? What does this chart suggest about that all and so forth? It means that whoever wins will invariably find themselves having to very significantly, very quickly orient their energy and decision-making process to what would be called the death of the old and the commitment to the new, in a very strong sense. And it's kind of says, don't expect it to just get all of a sudden abundant and prosperous, like it's practically saying there's an expansive quality. It's really saying to people, look, people, get creative. Okay, it's saying get creative and be patient and work at maintaining your emotional center, because if you don't, you could be the casualty of becoming unraveled. So in other words, I will venture that there could be a fairly high level of unraveling occurring. You said, and we're not really going to go into this too much, but with the big division in the United States between Democrats and Republicans, that unraveling could be whoever wins, right? It's unfortunately it's loaded. So it's gonna be somebody, whoever wins, gonna kind of have to take some fairly revolutionary posture. And by the time, not even long, by the time the summer comes, there will be some major the people who will do well, of course, are those who adapt and reimagine and not react and try and lock in polarized views, and or think and hope and believe that it will be as stable as it was. It's kind of almost, the dice are pretty loaded, right? That even whoever wins in that election, it's going to probably have a destabilizing. I hate to even say that. I'd like to be
It's just
wrong
a
about that.
reality. It's
Yeah, I'd
being
like to
set
be,
up for it. It's nothing
and it's good.
personal against the people that live in this country or citizens of this country. We are being set up to undergo a once in a century, maybe 2 centuries event that
Process.
we don't have a lot of control over.
Yeah, it's the one final word I'll leave here is this. Yes, it's going to get edgy. Well, no, a few words. It's going to get edgy. You're going to have to reel everybody. Get creative. Don't start spending all your money foolishly. Be wiser with your investments. And positively speaking, it's going to pull people together. It's like, in crisis, people come together. That will be its highest attribute of the year. And hopefully whoever wins is really going to very quickly step forward and say, look, people, look, I know we're polarized, but we got to come together now. And we got to get past this, polarized perspective. And I think that's going to be a little easier said than done. Like it's not going to just be obvious, perhaps, but it does show on a part of it's as though the one room that they're renovating is kind of like what you could call first. It's almost like a meeting room of some sort. like it's gonna ask, like we're gonna first do the
Living room.
I don't know, Living room, yes, that's a better, couldn't have said it better and more obvious. Yes, like the living room, where the living happens and the people kind of tend to meet each other there. Yes, exactly correct. You got it. And so yeah. So anybody listening to this, don't kind of run for the hills. Just, but be aware, it's not just gonna, as would be the case, um, be business as usual. See, the reason I partially say all this is because the moon is waning to the sun, and it's no less than at the 29th critical degree. Okay, whenever a planet's at the critical degree, it's squaring Neptune, all of which in English means like over imagination, people having meltdowns because their perceptions of reality is that it's the end of the world, that that it's just like whoever, like if Kamala Harris wins and all the Trumpers will just, oh my God, we've, like, or vice versa, right? So I'm a little frustrated. Well, it is what it is, but it's kind of like, oh my God, this is loaded. And and some people will just, not everybody will be able to handle as well as everybody else. So yeah, it's going to be really a time to hold each other's hand.
Deep breath, be kind to
Yeah.
one another. Kindness
Big
is the
breath.
most valued
Yeah.
attribute that you can have as a human being. Just being kind
Yeah.
to other people.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah. It's like that. It's like it's gonna be like, I have to admit, probably kind of scary. Scary kind of maybe isn't the right word even. They're gonna have to face fears and get creative is the word that keeps coming to mind. So adapt, be creative, keep your feet on the ground, work together, cooperate, invest your money wisely. Don't be frivolous and throw it around silly. Forget that cruise, and or unnecessary trip, or anything that represents, spin, what do you call that? Spending money unwisely and crazily. I would encourage most people don't do that, because we all have to keep paying the bills. So you need to generate keep staying creative means, finding maybe new ways of generating income, or spending money where it doesn't need to be spent. And I can help people. I'll throw that out there. If I can help you be creative. That's a big thing. It's not just I don't myself as an astrologer. That's why I'm a life coach astrologer. I don't merely make predictions. I work with people creatively, the life coach approach, and kind of roll up my sleeves and give people tools and guide them, and and it can, yeah. So I invite them to check me out there, and sunstar-astrology.com, and I'll help you out.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate you coming back on and sharing all this information with us.
Thank you, Jill, for having me. Yeah, I really appreciate it, because it's a message that kind of I'm happy myself to share, and I'm trusting that it will land where it needs to, and hopefully others will share it a bit long, but it's a worthwhile listen, I'd like to think, just to help people get that much more prepared. So thank you again, Jill. All the best, and maybe we'll do something another day and another focus, but boy, this is a big one.
Wes, thanks. Bye.